I'm CNBC producer Klaire Odumody. Today on our podcast, the two men vying to be a heartbeat away from the presidency meet in 2024's only vice presidential debate. Democrat Tim Walz.
Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share.
Versus Republican J.D. Vance.
Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now.
Some back and forth on the names at the tops of the tickets.
Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China.
In a conversation surprisingly deep on policy.
A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom.
But does it matter? Does a debate between number two issues move the needle on the closest election in memory? We dig into it with Jay Clayton, former SEC chair.
These candidates responded to the American people asking for substance. We had substance last night on the economy, we had substance on border, and we had substance on conflict in the Middle East and Ukraine.
And Gary Cohn, an economic advisor in the Trump White House.
They both are in similar predicaments, as we've said. They're both looking for labor's vote. They both want support from all of the longshoremen and everyone that's attached to them.
And the Middle East on the brink of war after Iran's missile attack on Israel. Retired Colonel and Medal of Honor winner Jack Jacobs joins us.
Despite the fact that Iran is now much stronger than it was 40 years ago, it does not yet have nuclear weapons and does not want a larger war with Israel. But they got a lot of face to say, which is one reason why they launched all those missiles.
It's Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Good morning and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernen and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Meantime, let's talk about what's taking place in the Middle East right now amid Iran's missile attack on Israel. Crypto falling in line with equities. Bitcoin fell as much as 5.7% yesterday. Right now you're looking at it at $61,251 and gold trending, or I should say trading and trending below its record high. Nonetheless, I don't know. I'm actually surprised that things have not moved lower, given the real risks that I think exist and the possible escalation that is likely potentially to take place today.
Risk assets, not gold should be where it is.
I've been shocked by the
gold
crude oil prices.
And yield should fall, you would think. But crude prices, there was a big jump in crude, but just barely over 70 at this point after Iran launched a ballistic missile attack on Israel. Iran says that the strike was retaliation for a couple of things: the recent killing of a Hezbollah leader and an Iranian commander. Most of the nearly 200 missiles, 200, were intercepted, and a new kind that hadn't been used before, were intercepted by Israeli and U.S. defenses, although some did hit their targets. Some injuries were reported, but no deaths from the attack. The White House says the U.S. military coordinated closely with the Israeli Defense Forces to help defend Israel against the attack. Join us now, Medal of Honor recipient, Colonel Jack Jacobs. He's an NBC News military analyst. And I keep having to remind myself, Colonel, without the Iron Dome, without the United States, without even Jordan, 200 missiles. That is a huge escalation by Iran of the situation. Because remember the last time we said, well, it was a kind of a measured response as we're worried about poking the bear vis-a-vis the nuclear facilities. They don't want to do that. If these had not been stopped, there would have been carnage in Tel Aviv. So there's no doubt that Netanyahu is justified in answering in a pretty significant way, don't you think?
Well, yes, and not only that, although it looks like the same thing that happened last April, it's decidedly different because of the large number of ballistic missiles, which are far faster than other vehicles. The large number of ballistic missiles Iran launched at Israel. The real question is what's going to happen next, and if it could go one of two ways. Either it'll look like last April. Israel will select a couple of targets near critical areas like Natanz, where one of the places where Iran is developing nuclear weapons, and not hit that facility, but hit near it to remind Iran that it can it can hit those facilities. Or Israel will decide enough's enough and they'll start hitting those facilities. An interesting story, about 40 years ago, Israel had the capability of knocking out the nuclear development facilities at Natanz and al-Bashir and a couple of other places because they were very vulnerable. A lot of it was above ground and so on. And for a number of reasons, including the fact that we told Israel not to do it, they didn't do it. And now, with those hardened sites, it's difficult or impossible to hit them. We've urged restraint on Israel for 40 years, and restraint, I mean, the political view inside Israel, notwithstanding the fact that people don't like Netanyahu, the view inside Israel is that 40 years of restraint have gotten everybody to a much more difficult position strategically and have caused no end of problems. And now Iran is much more difficult to corral. Iran, a terribly malign influence in the Middle East. So it remains to be seen what happens next. It could go either way.
Lindsey Graham immediately said the refinery's got to be, the ability to refine oil needs to be at least considered. But I'm wondering, so the nuclear sites are hardened. Does that mean that Israel does not have the capacity to take them out, Colonel? And are you sure that that's not going to be on the docket?
Well, I'm sure it is on the docket. It's one of the options. And they can take them out. There's a variety of weapons they can use to destroy them. But whether or not they're going to use them is something else again. Iran would... An attack on the oil facilities is one thing. Attack on Natanz and al-Bashir and the nuclear facilities, something else again. And Iran would probably react differently.
But, OK, let's talk about then what the reaction would be to that. I hate to say play the war game out, but if you were to go after the nuclear facilities, and I think there are a lot of folks that are thinking that that may be the next step in all of this, what does Iran do and how does it do it differently than it did yesterday?
Well, we have to start off with the assumption that despite the fact that Iran is now much stronger than it was 40 years ago, it does not yet have nuclear weapons. And it has internal problems it doesn't want to have to deal with while it's dealing with a war with Israel and a larger war with Israel, and does not want a larger war with Israel. But they got a lot of face to say, which is one reason why they launched all those missiles. One of Iran's reactions could be an enormous number of missiles, most of them ballistic missiles, which might be, we'll go back to the original suggestion, the subject we talked about. Can the Iron Dome, with the United States and Jordan and other allies, can they thwart an enormous attack, ballistic missile attack on Israel? And the answer is they won't be able to thwart it. And a lot of that stuff is going to get through, and that will change the calculus immeasurably in the region.
Colonel, just trying to figure out what that means ultimately is that even though Israel might be able to take out those facilities, they're never going to be able to do it unless they're actually taking out those facilities because they have nuclear weapons that would be targeting them and aimed at them at that point, because otherwise the retaliation factor is too high?
Yeah, that's probably the calculus, and they probably won't do it. They may do what they did last April, but what is really on the table now and is more likely as attack on oil facilities. One of the things that Iran can't do now because of the things that Israel has done because of its intelligence is coordinate an attack by all of its proxies in the region. And the United States is prepared to and has already done so, attack the Houthis when they restrict traffic through the Gulf and so on. That's one of the reasons why we recently moved thousands of new assets into the region, most of them air assets, sea-launched air assets and ground-launched assets. And we now have about 40,000 people in the region to do exactly that.
If Iran was careful last time because of not wanting to put the nuclear facilities to give Israel an excuse to do that. When they decided to do that yesterday, did they say all bets are off, or is it just a game of chicken? Are they saying I mean, this is a significantly more aggressive move on Israel. They have to know that may have been enough to cause Israel to say we have cause to do this. Did they know?
No, I think the calculus there was we've got to respond. Otherwise, we lose tremendous face. We got to demonstrate to Israel that we're serious.
Right, but you're suggesting that yesterday was somehow performative then. I mean, we heard this.
Yeah.
If they didn't have the Iron Dome, it would have been a hell of a lot more than performative. So Iran can pretend, we knew they were going to take them all out, and we knew we weren't going to hurt anyone. We fired just the right amount so that the Iron Dome would hold up.
No, I don't think that they're that smart. I think what they did was include a large number of ballistic missiles, at least partially as a test to see whether or not the Iron Dome could deal with it, which it did. But a very large number, a coordinated assault would be totally different. But no, it was at least partially a test, and we're going to see the results of that test because they also want to see what is Israel going to do about that. But they included a large number of ballistic missiles, at least partially as a test, Joe.
I just don't see why Israel wouldn't say, we got to do it eventually. This is
I just don't understand.
You don't want Iran with a nuclear bomb.
If these things are hardened, why? I mean, you're saying that we could still do it. If Israel and you think the U.S. and others have the means to do it,
we won't be involved.
This may be the time to do it. It's actually a fascinating. I don't know if you read it.
We said we won't be involved. We'll defend, but no offense, right? We can't be involved in taking the facilities out.
There was a fascinating. Right. There's a fascinating tweet
but we also
by Jared Kushner over the weekend. It had more to do with what was happening in Lebanon. I don't know if you read it.
Right.
And it was basically how this was one of these once-in-a-lifetime moments, once-in-a-generation moments, that you can't be he was basically saying you can't be calling for ceasefires or anything else. That if you have, if you're ever going to take this all out and change the Middle East, this is it.
Middle East would, if they do
Colonel,
get the bomb.
I'm curious what you think of that.
Well, like I said, they could have done it, and we could have assisted 40 years ago, have urged restraint for decades, and Israel's view is this is what restraint has gotten us. And we're still calling for restraint. And at the end of the day, Israel has said, we don't care about what you have to say. We're going to do what we need to do. Striking the ports, striking oil facilities, the most likely result, but we'll see.
Right. Can I ask one other question? Because, yes, it's true this administration and others around the world have called for restraint, and yet the truth is that we have continued to supply them with protection and defenses and coordination and all sorts of things. And so there is this question mark about whether these governments are saying one thing effectively to the public to say we're restraint, but, Netanyahu is going to do what Netanyahu is going to do. They may not love it, but some of them actually may. What do you think of that?
Well, international relations, particularly with respect to the use of the military instrument, has always been like that. I mean, we've supplied and assisted a wide variety of regimes with lots of weaponry and guidance. And I was in Vietnam for a long time as an advisor telling the Vietnamese at a tactical level what to do and how to act. The United States was telling the Vietnamese what to do and how to act for the 10 years that we were there, and they did whatever they wanted in any case, despite the fact that we were supplying them. We are not going to stop supplying Israel with defensive weapons.
How much can Iran count on Russia? Russia is, maybe that was a stupid move from Putin because they're tied up, aren't they? Iran can't count on Russia, can they?
No, it can't count on Russia. I mean, Russia can't even count on Russia.
Right.
Russia hasn't changed in 1,000 years and continues to make stupid choices and will continue to make stupid choices. So, no, they can't count on Russia.
Well, it seems like, I don't know. I guess everything changed on October 7th it's going to be a year soon. But yesterday seemed like it was a quantum escalation in things. Thanks, Colonel.
You bet.
Cheese will be next.
Still to come, the highs and lows of the vice presidential debate. Midwestern nice from J.D. Vance and Tim Walz.
Anybody who thought that this was going to be the attack dogs going up against each other completely misjudged this.
And do voters care?
Did anyone watch? How big was this, do you think?
Not that big.
Squawk Pod will be right back. This is Squawk Pod with Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Up and Becky, cue.
Now to last night's vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. The Ohio senator and the Minnesota governor largely kept things cordial and at one point actually even said that they could work with each other. But they repeatedly attacked each other's running mates. And here are a few key moments related to the economy.
Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago. He said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession.
Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens.
It was pretty remarkable. Anybody who thought that this was going to be the attack dogs going up against each other completely misjudged this. J.D. Vance kind of set the tone from the beginning, and I think went after the idea that he had these lower likability numbers going into that because he was very cordial, kept his calm and cool.
I thought he was very likable. I kept saying, I agree with you, Tim, on this.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Tim, on that. I thought it was sort of surprising.
J.D. Vance performed flawlessly. It was hard to see anything that he did wrong in that debate at all.
I'm just going to I'm looking at social media. It speaks for itself. It was. I saw half of it. I'm proud. Had a couple glasses of wine, saw half of it. Went to
bed. You stayed up late?
Really late.
Yeah, very late.
Really late. But yeah, I was a knucklehead. Stayed up late.
Look, I don't know how much vice presidential debates matter, but whatever happened, J.D. Vance performed to the best that he possibly could.
It wasn't surprising. He was on the show, and he's been battle tested in terms of having going on a lot of interviews, hostile interviews. But
it didn't surprise me that he was able to handle every question the way that he did it so affably.
Yeah. And he was tacking. I mean, even on the abortion issue, I don't know if you saw how he answered that question.
And
then how Tim
former
Walz
President Trump afterwards put out on social media that he would not only turn down, not only not support a national abortion ban, but that he would veto it too.
I mean, I said it yesterday to you, Andrew. I mean, Josh Shapiro versus J.D. Vance yesterday, I think would have been a totally different situation. I think that was a big mistake. I think if it does turn out to be that way, that will be what I would say would be the fatal flaw.
I also found. I mean, I don't know. You said you thought that he performed flawlessly. I don't know what flawlessly means, but I was going to say I thought that Tim Walz on the issues. You know, a lot of people think that he's somehow not deep or somehow like unable to answer the questions or doesn't know what's going on and. People, I've had this conjecture that's been made on our show and other shows. I actually thought on the merits of the questions and the merits of the answers.
So that's how you would describe the effects of the Trump tax cuts. How he just described
he knew what he was talking
about.
Really,
that was what he said was factual about going to rich people and corporations are rich people. That's who got the tax cuts, and the rest of the whole curve of people that pay taxes didn't get a tax cut in 2017. That was total crap. What he said. That was the same trope. Just you can repeat.
You know what's funny?
Being skillful at repeating lies is not knowing the issues. Being skillful at doing the populist. He just wants tax cuts for billionaires. That is not knowing
most of the time
policy.
in the debates, you don't get deep policy. I will say Walz actually performed well.
Walz went very, very deep on the policy issues.
Except for the case where he couldn't answer the question on whether or not he was in Tiananmen Square.
He didn't answer the very first question, which is whether
that was a big fumble.
He didn't answer the very first question, which was whether he'd go after the nuclear facilities, and then, in fact, J.D. Vance did and said, whatever Israel needs to do, I'd back them 100% on what they need to do. You did not hear that from Walz right at the beginning. And I think not picking Shapiro, we know why he wasn't picked. And now now it's totally hitting the fan. So I think that's not great news.
You know what? The intimation of why he wasn't picked.
Why wasn't he picked?
Why wasn't he picked?
I think he wasn't picked because they wanted to win Michigan. That's why I think they didn't pick Shapiro. I think that there is a movement in the Democratic Party not to a certain demographic. They don't want to push them away. They want to win this election in a lot of different ways that I don't think are really that admirable as you just, I think, use that.
I think there were a litany of reasons.
I think there were.
Well, I don't know. Supposedly, I'm now wondering, as good as J.D. Vance was, is Trump like, I don't like this guy. Stealing. Is Trump like, this guy is taking some of, because everyone's saying this is what we should have seen. You see a lot of people say that this is what he made a better case for Trump than Trump did. And I think when Trump
and he also
that,
acknowledges Trump's foibles. You know, he's also he'll often say, I know you think Trump is like this, or I think he almost starts his question. He almost starts his answers sort of acknowledging the elephant in the room about his.
It was sort of almost like, what's the martial arts where you just sort of move as you get.
Jiu-jitsu, you use your enemy's force against them.
Exactly. He was very malleable, but it worked. It worked to where you don't get it in, and I think it works for people watch. Did anyone watch? How big was this, do you think?
Not that big. And I think I'm imagining that if there's like a ratings line, it went down, not up.
Right.
And not just because it got later in the night.
I thought, fine, I'm not going to go into the moderators, but it was exactly what I figured was going to happen too. Maybe you didn't think so, but it was like, I think they all just talk to each other, the mainstream media types. And if like David Muir says great job to Norah O'Donnell, Norah O'Donnell says great job to David Muir. It's like they're all in this little echo chamber.
I think these are very, very challenging jobs, and I think
we have to do it too. And I like the way we do it a lot better.
Well, I just think that,
and hopefully we'll have a chance to keep doing it.
That somehow the media is at fault.
I'm not saying they're at fault. I'm saying that it was 3-1 again.
Margaret Brennan asked the question. Margaret Brennan asked the question twice, and she followed up when she followed up when.
Thank God he and then they muted his mic when he fact checked the fact checkers. But,
Coming up next on Squawk Pod, the economic issues front and center in the vice presidential debate. Gary Cohn.
From the Harris-Walz team, they put out 82 pages of new and bigger entitlements. New housing credits, small business credits, forgiveness of student loans, higher inflation, enhanced child credit. I can keep going.
And the looming specter of a war in the Middle East, the biggest port strike in a generation, and how that will hit the markets. Jay Clayton.
What's not in the textbooks? A port strike. What's not in the textbooks? Increased conflict in the Middle East, energy price shock, if that comes or not. These things are not there, and both of them are inflationary.
Welcome back to Squawk Pod.
You're watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin along with Joe Kernen and Becky Quick. We got a lot of news to get to this morning.
Let's get to last night's vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. We are joined this morning by former SEC Chairman Jay Clayton. He's now Apollo's non-executive chair and a CNBC contributor. Also Gary Cohn, who is former NEC Director. He's now IBM vice chair as well. And gentlemen, thank you both for being here this morning. Why don't we just start with what we learned last night? What'd you take away from it?
Here was my takeaway, that I've said it before. The American people are smart, and these candidates responded to the American people asking for substance. We had substance last night on the economy. We had substance on border, and we had substance on conflict in the Middle East and Ukraine. Yeah. And that's because the campaigns responded to the American people saying, give us something, instead of calling each other names.
And by the way, civility, I think, too. It was the other thing that came away from this.
I was very impressed by the substance, and I was particularly impressed by JD's substance, not just isolated on those issues, but across those issues, how they all tie together. The American people know that a strong economy, strong national defense, and immigration, migration, where we're going forward, they all tie together. And I thought he did a particularly good job of being consistent across those issues.
Gary, what did you think on the economy, the issues that came out there?
So I think on the economy, again, I'm not sure we learned a lot. I don't think any new policy was put out. In fact, the only new policy that's been put out since we were here last is the Harris-Walz team did put out their 82-page economic platform, which is quite interesting, and maybe we should spend some time talking about that.
Well, let's do it.
But what we've learned, and I think what they continue to do, is they continue to reiterate that what you've seen in the past is what you're going to get in the future. So what you saw from the Trump administration during their 4 years, their policy of lower taxes, very accommodative from the regulatory standpoint, trying to grow the economy, they continue to reiterate that. From the Walz team, they put out 82 pages of new and bigger entitlements. Like, I could go through the list, but I'm not sure we have enough time. We're going to talk about new housing credits, small business credits, forgiveness of student loans, higher inflation, enhanced child credits, preschool credits, long-term care credits, paid family leave credits, government control of health care, price controls. I can keep going.
No,
the list keeps going on.
You're right.
And on.
I think you're absolutely right that there's a big change, but I would say it's the same from both campaigns. Because I would say former President Trump has laid out a pretty long litany of things on the campaign trail that he would spend on. And we're not looking at a whole lot of ways to raise it outside of tariffs. So I think you're right. I think both of these campaigns are talking about pretty aggressive shifts from what we've seen in the past.
No, I think this is exactly what Bidenomics is. I think the Harris-Walz team laid out in 82 pages Bidenomics. So now we can call it Harrisonomics. And I think what you've seen from the Trump-Vance team is you've seen a reiteration of what they did in the past. They continue to talk about lowering taxes. They do continue to talk about tariffs. We've talked about tariffs, where they're effective and where they're not effective. They continue to talk about growing the economy. Growing the economy so we have a higher GDP, so everyone gets raised up, so we can grow wages, we can grow the entire size. And I think that's the difference. One is grow the economy so all boats rise. The other is redistribution of the economy.
The two things that really strike me now, though, is we are faced with massive news issues that we've been talking about all morning. One would be what's happening in the Middle East. The second would be the strike with the longshoremen. And maybe we should start with the easier one first, being the longshoremen.
Yeah. So we were talking, Jay Powell, I think everybody's giving him high marks for where we are in trying to land this. What's not in the textbooks? A port strike. What's not in the textbooks? Increased conflict in the Middle East, energy price shock, if that comes or not. These things are not there, and both of them are inflationary.
Yeah.
And so what do you do if you're at the Fed? You've done very well here. You've kind of brought demand down. We're going to headed towards soft landing, and all of a sudden you have these two inflationary forces hitting you in the face. The Fed has a tougher job today than they did a week ago.
And what happens? I mean, Gary, just looking at it from the economic perspective, we've been talking about how 0.3% cut off GDP if this lasts a week, and every week thereafter.
No, look, as Jay said, we've been talking about this a lot. This is a much tougher scenario, and we haven't thrown the Middle East in there. We haven't thrown a major oil shock. We haven't thrown in there closing the Suez Canal and making shipping routes completely different. And we know the difference in shipping costs going around Africa than through the Mediterranean. These things are highly inflationary. This will be the real definition of transitory inflation. We'll get back to where we thought we were 4 years ago of transitory inflation, a port strike, real disruption in the Middle East and shipping lanes and oil. This is all will have real short-term impact on the U.S. economy. And I think Chair Powell sort of started foreshadowing that last week, where he started talking about a slower, more methodical move. Mm-hmm. I think he was foreshadowing exactly what he thought may be in the cards with the port strike. Right. Look, we got the 50 basis points, which we always thought was 25 at Jackson Hole and 25 at the meeting. That was the 50. Then we thought there'd be 25 more in the next two meetings. Look, I think there still is probably 25 more in the next two meetings, but it's not is positive. I'm not as positive today as I was last time I sat there because of the port strike and because of what's going on in the Middle East. These things can amplify very, very quickly.
This is the head of the Longshoremen Union, and this is what he had to say.
Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means.
And then he goes on to suggest how he's going to cripple the country by all of the different various people who are going to lose their job. And I mean, by the way, he's a Trump supporter, known to be. I'm curious actually what your reaction is to that and what you think either former President Trump should be saying about this, or frankly, what you think Vice President Harris should be saying about this.
Let me jump in on this. Both sides are hoping to get the vote from labor, right?
Totally.
And one of the reasons is because the American people feel good about labor. We want people to have good jobs. What is one of the worst things that can happen when you're representing a constituency? That you go from having the American people behind you to losing the American people.
Right.
What I saw in that video was someone who's going to lose the American people if he's going to tell you, I'm going to jam you for money. Now, even worse, I'm going to jam you for money, and we want a prohibition on technology coming to ports in America. That's saying we want a job for life where we're going to hold you up.
And
you know what?
You're going to think the political implication should be, and what you think the leading politicians in this election should be saying as a result of this, because nobody wants to touch this.
Well, I touch and I say you shouldn't be jamming the American people like this. Here's a.
Do you think that former President Trump should call him or publicly call him out?
Let me propose a positive way forward. Right? These jobs have been there. They're very high-paying jobs. They're good for those families. I get that. I'm sympathetic to that. But the idea that you have that job for life and technology isn't going to replace it. Let's work on a 2, 3, 4-year contract like you would in corporate America, with a buyout at the end to allow technology to come forward. That's a way forward for everybody. You've got 3 or 4 years to plan, but this kind of kick the can down the road each time, ridiculous.
What do you think both of these candidates should say about this? Sort of boxes both of them in different ways.
Yeah, I think they both are in similar predicaments, as we've said. They're both looking for labor's vote. They both want support from all of the longshoremen and everyone that's attached to them, the Teamsters and everyone else.
Am I wrong to think that if you were former President Trump, you would actually be happy if this were to continue?
I don't think anyone's happy.
No one's happy.
I don't think anyone's happy.
You don't think that would on the margins help his campaign?
I'm not sure marginally it helps your campaign.
I think that's a level of cynicism that goes way too far. Nobody likes that behavior.
No one likes that. And I think Jay's bringing a really important point. You know, and this came out a little bit last night too. We're in a global economy. We have to compete globally. We cannot and we should not give a contract where we're prohibiting modern technology and modern efficiency to be part of our economy. That would be a bad
I think that's
play.
the biggest sticking point.
I think it is the sticking point.
Digging into,
I think that's the
this
sticking
a little
point.
deeper. They're already saying that in the port, I think it's in Virginia, in one of the ports, where they have, a scanning check-in of the cargo that's coming in beforehand, that's a violation of their existing contract, and they don't want to see that happen.
But this is a country that has grown itself. We're the largest economy in the world for a reason. We have embraced technology.
Right.
We are a country that has more startups and more new companies that have created technology. We cannot stifle the use of technology in this country.
So let me ask you, if should the Biden-Harris administration at this point step in, because Joe Biden has said he will not to this point, and if former President Trump was in the White House, would you advise him to step in on this?
I think I just gave you the advice.
So the answer
that I
is yes
would.
on both.
Step in and say, where are we 5 years from now? Because we can't be in this place. Let's figure out how to get back to work.
And that guy went the nuclear option. We'll shut you down. But whenever anyone strikes, the implied threat is you're going to screw something up and you're going to cost someone money. It depends on how long it lasts. But the implied threat is I am going to hurt you economically. I mean, obviously, this guy said I'm going to shut.
Right. If someone says I'm going to hurt the middle class economically, I think you should step up and say, you know what, that's bad. That's bad behavior.
But the only reason you strike is to cause economic disruption either to your employer or the country itself. So that's just, I'm sorry, that's all's fair in love and war. That's why.
I think the American people are smart on this too. They see what's going on.
Well, I bet you this lasts a while, and it is like there's in real estate, there's buyers and sellers market. This is a labor market right now after GM and the other The big three, those contracts. What do these guys want? 80 over
well,
60?
70, I think they said 70, but the automation may be the bigger sticking point.
And we're talking about people I think earn $170,000 plus a year. Which, look, I have no problem with that.
I mean, they also say they work long hours.
Let me be clear.
There's plenty of school teachers in New York City earning $50,000 and $60,000 a year that we're entrusting our kids to every day.
You've made that much during the segment, basically.
I'm doing this for the love of you, Joe.
Let's be clear. It is this technology point, and this idea that technology destroys jobs.
Right.
No, there are new jobs that are created
that goes
as
back
a result
to the 19th
of
century.
It is such a false trope.
So what should we be doing from the Middle East? And I'm not asking you to fix the situation in the Middle East, but how do we prepare ourselves? How do we look at this from an economic point of view, from the markets too?
Okay, going back to the debate last night in the Middle East, what did we learn?
Yeah.
This idea that allowing Iran to develop nuclear energy capability was one of the great policy failures of all time. And it's such irony that how many nuclear plants have we built in the U.S. when we're trying to become energy independent? Yeah. One that you guys bailed out during the Trump administration. So this idea that we're giving them freedom, money, et cetera, to build nuclear energy, and we don't have the permitting, we don't do anything in the U.S. Like, that's scary. You had Dan St. Arn. Again, the American people have woken up. They're supporting Israel because they see how ridiculous this is to have any kind of appeasement or the like with Iran. The last week has been really good in terms of the American people showing the leaders how to think about these things. So one of the also interesting things last night was the phrasing, would you support a preemptive strike against Iran? It's not preemptive. They just fired 200 ballistic missiles. That's not preemptive.
It's preemptive before they use a nuclear freaking bomb.
Yeah,
I can't believe we're talking about that.
The wisdom of the American people is showing through right now, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Gary and Jay.
That's the pod for today. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Catch them weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 a.m. Eastern. And to get the best parts of our TV show right into your ears, follow Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. Have a lovely day, and we'll meet you back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.